My name is Margaret Hall, and I turned 72 last spring. I used to believe that if you raised your children with love and honesty, they'd always find their way back to you in kindness. But the day my own son told me to leave my room so his wife could make it a guest suite, that was the day I learned even love can grow deaf with comfort. I've always been an early riser. Old bones and decades of habit will do that to you. At 5:45 every morning, the world is at its gentlest, soft light through thin curtains. The muffled hum of the refrigerator, a silence I can almost hold in my palms. I slipped into my robe and padded to the kitchen, careful not to wake Michael and Karen, my son and daughter-in-law. The house was bigger than the one my late husband and I had built together, yet it never felt like home. Not really. When Richard Hall, my husband, passed away 10 years ago, Michael insisted I sell the old house. "Mom," he'd said, "live with us. It'll be easier for everyone." At the time, his words sounded like love. I believed him. Now I stayed tucked away in the smallest room by the garage, though I was the one who paid half the down payment on this place after selling the home where Richard and I raised our boy. The kettle whistled softly. I poured myself chamomile tea, the only thing my blood pressure seems to like, and looked out at the backyard. The air still smelled of dew, that faint sweetness of wet grass mixed with soil. I used to plant marigolds every spring. Now a landscaper did it for appearances. Footsteps creaked down the hallway. Karen entered in a silk robe, scrolling on her phone. "Oh, good morning, Margaret," she said without looking up, her voice polite but hollow. "Morning, Karen. I made oatmeal. You're welcome to have some." She smiled, that kind of smile that's more manners than warmth. "Thanks, but Mike ordered breakfast from the cafe. He wanted something quick." Quick. That word had replaced everything that used to be tender. Quick meals, quick conversations, quick goodnights. A few moments later, Michael appeared, still fastening his tie. He gave me a distracted peck on the cheek while checking the headline on his phone. "Morning, Mom. You sleep okay?" "I did," I lied. "My knees sang all night about the rain coming, but other than that, fine." He half chuckled, distracted. "You and that barometer of yours." I noticed the fresh paint sample taped near the staircase, warm beige turning to modern gray. "You repainting again?" I asked. Karen answered too quickly. "Just thinking about refreshing the guest room." My heart skipped. The guest room. That's what they called my little corner now. "Oh?" I said softly. "Something wrong with the color?" No, Michael interjected, tone casual. "Karen's parents might visit in a few months. The room would be more comfortable if we do it over. Might even move you to the den while they're here." "Of course," I murmured. Whatever works. He meant well, or at least he believed he did. But words like "move you to the den" landed heavy. For a moment, the kitchen felt smaller, the air thinner. They left together soon after, coffee cups in hand, laughter echoing through the hall. When the door shut behind them, silence returned like an old friend I didn't want, but couldn't chase. I cleaned the counters, rinsed their dishes, and watered the houseplants Karen often forgot. The sun moved across the table, climbing, bright but lonely. By evening, the hum of their voices floated through the walls while I sat by my window. I heard the clink of dinner plates and the TV laughter that followed. No one called my name. People think loneliness is loud, crying, complaining, begging to be noticed. But sometimes it's quiet. It's the sound of your son's voice in the next room and knowing none of those words are meant for you. I pressed my hand against the window pane, felt the cool glass, and whispered to myself, I didn't yet realize the storm was coming. The storm arrived 3 nights later, quietly, the way storms sometimes creep in before tearing the sky apart. It was Saturday evening, and Karen had suggested we all eat dinner together. We barely sit down as a family anymore, she'd said brightly. And you know how Michael loves roast chicken. I wanted to believe her warmth was genuine. Maybe it was, but there was something unfamiliar in her smile, polite, rehearsed. I spent the afternoon seasoning the chicken the way Richard used to like it, with rosemary and lemon slices tucked beneath the skin. The smell of it filled the kitchen with nostalgia and regret in equal measure. By 6:30, the table was set. They came in talking about some renovation videos Karen had seen online. Open layouts, modern lighting, spare furniture. Words that meant nothing to me, but carried the excitement of people planning for something new. We sat down. For a moment, everything felt almost normal. Then Michael cleared his throat. "Mom, we need to talk about the house." My fork froze halfway to my mouth. He always used that tone when he wanted to sound calm, but had already made a decision. Karen reached for his hand across the table. Her nails were polished the same soft pink as the dining room wall. "You know my parents are arriving next month," she said gently. "We thought they could stay here instead of a hotel." "Of course," I said. "They're family," Karen smiled. "Yes, but the guest room is small and doesn't have a private bath. Your room would be more comfortable for them. Just while they're here." My stomach tightened. "My room?" It came out quieter than I intended. Michael nodded, as if discussing a perfectly ordinary arrangement. "You could stay in the basement for a few weeks. I'll move your things down myself, the basement, the space with a cement floor and a small window near the ceiling. I'd kept my old sewing machine there, rusting in the damp, because Karen once said it cluttered the hallway." "For a few weeks," I repeated. "And after that?" He sighed, impatient. "Mom, we're just trying to make everyone comfortable. Don't make this harder than it is." "Harder? For whom?" My throat tightened, but I forced a small smile. "I see." "Well, I suppose comfort is important." Karen leaned forward. "We were hoping you'd understand. You're such a generous person." I looked at her, that calm voice, those perfect nails, the faint scent of expensive perfume that lingered on everything she touched. For the first time, I realized generosity was something people liked to praise in old women, as long as they benefited from it. Michael cleared his plate with brisk efficiency. "I'll call the movers tomorrow, Ma. We'll get you settled before they arrive." Something inside me snapped. It wasn't anger, not yet. More like the painful clarity of someone finally hearing the truth behind polite words. "Michael," I said softly, "do you remember what it took for us to buy this house?" He looked confused. "You helped with the down payment." "We've talked about that." "Helped?" I felt a shaky laugh escape me. "Your father and I sold everything after he died. 40 years of marriage in boxes. I gave you that money so you'd have stability, so you'd have a family home." Karen's voice sharpened. "We appreciate that, Margaret, but it doesn't give you the right to guilt-trip us." Guilt trip. Such an ugly phrase, one that makes love sound manipulative. I looked at my son, the man who once clung to my arm after nightmares, whispering he'd protect me when he grew up. He wouldn't even meet my eyes now. "Fine," I said quietly. "I'll move." "Thank you," Karen breathed, relief spreading across her face. But Michael wasn't finished. "And Mom, when they come, could you please not mention that you paid part of the house? It makes them uncomfortable." The words hit hard, like a cold wind through a cracked window. My hands trembled slightly. "I'm sorry. I just don't understand why my own story would make anyone uncomfortable." He pushed back his chair, his tone rising. "Because you keep acting like we owe you. You live here rent-free, Mom. We pay the bills, the groceries, everything. The least you could do is stop reminding everyone that you once helped out." The room went silent, but for the faint ticking of the wall clock, Karen sat frozen. Eyes darting between us, I stood up slowly, gripping the edge of the table for balance. "You're right, Michael. Maybe I do remind you too often." But that's what happens when people forget gratitude. You have to draw their memory in chalk over and over before they wipe it clean again. He rolled his eyes. You always make everything dramatic. I smiled a tired, brittle smile. Years of motherhood will do that. I walked toward my room, ignoring Karen's soft, "She didn't mean it that way," behind me. Maybe she didn't. Maybe she did. At that moment, I didn't care. Inside my small room, the lamplight looked dimmer than usual. I sat on the bed and stared at the family photo on the dresser, Michael at 12, grinning between Richard and me, his hand resting on my shoulder. Almost the same age his own daughter would reach. Soon, I wondered what kind of mother he'd raised, if she treated him the way he'd treated me. Tonight, my hands shook as I folded the napkin from dinner, a nervous habit I never outgrew. From downstairs came the faint hum of their laughter again, carried through the air vents like salt rubbed on fresh skin. I pressed my palms to my eyes, whispering to no one, "Humiliation is quiet. It doesn't scream or break plates. It just settles inside you, heavy, like dust." I exhaled, straightened my back, and said softly to myself, "But dust can be wiped away." The following week moved like honey, slow and sticky, every minute dragging while my mind wandered through years I'd nearly buried. Since the night Michael humiliated me, the house felt heavier. Even the air carried a kind of shame I couldn't quite name. I spent hours sorting through old boxes, pretending I was organizing, but really I was remembering. Richard's watch, my mother's silver comb, letters from the years when Michael still drew crayon hearts that said, "I love you, Mom." Each keepsake reminded me that memory could be both a gift and a wound. Outside, autumn had begun to press its chill against the window panes. I could hear Michael's daughter, little Lily, practicing piano in the living room. When she stumbled over the same notes again, I smiled. The sound of her trying reminded me of when Michael was learning violin, how his brows would furrow just the same way. "Grandma," she called from downstairs. "Do you want to hear my song?" I almost said yes, but Karen's voice followed quickly, sharp yet soft. "Sweetheart, Grandma's tired. Let her rest." A sigh escaped me before I even knew it was there. I wasn't tired. I was invisible. That night, I dreamt of the house Richard and I built together, the small clapboard one on Highland Drive, with the lilac bush he planted for our anniversary. We spent 40 years there, polishing the wood floors until they glowed. I could almost smell the varnish and hear the laughter from those crowded Sunday dinners we used to have when family still meant togetherness. When I woke up, the realization hit me like a quiet lightning strike. I had traded a lifetime of love and labor for the illusion of security. Later that afternoon, my neighbor Carol Mitchell rang the bell. We hadn't spoken much since I moved in. I think Karen once called her too nosy for her own good. Still, Carol smiled as I opened the door. "Hi, Margaret. I saw the junk hauler outside last week. You okay?" "Oh, yes," I said vaguely, "just clearing a few things." Her eyes softened. "You know, if you ever need to talk—" "I'm fine, dear," I cut in politely. The lie left a bitter taste. Carol's presence stirred emotions I wasn't ready to unpack. But even after she left, her words echoed. "If you ever need to talk." The next day, I found myself walking the few blocks to the grocery store. My cane clicked against the sidewalk, a metronome to my thoughts. I stopped by the courthouse across from the post office, the same building where Richard and I once signed our mortgage papers, and for the first time in years, curiosity nudged through my grief. What had I actually signed when we sold the old house and bought this one? I couldn't remember the fine print. At the bank, I asked the young teller if she could find my file. She looked puzzled but kind. "Of course, Mrs. Hall. Give me a few minutes." 10 minutes later, she handed me a printout and pointed to a line halfway down the page. There it was, right in black ink, primary ownership, Margaret Hall. Michael's name wasn't added until 3 years later, with a clause about survivorship rights. A quiet, surprising warmth spread through me. For the first time in months, I felt something like control return to my chest. Walking home, the bite of the wind didn't sting as much. Every step felt steadier. That evening, while Karen and Michael bickered about dinner plans in the next room, I sat with my documents carefully spread on the bed. Richard's handwriting danced across the margins of the original deed. "For Maggie," he had written once beside a scribbled heart. Looking at it now, I whispered, "You didn't leave me alone after all, did you, Richard?" The truth came slowly, rising like dawn. I might have grown old, but I wasn't powerless. For months I'd mistaken silence for weakness, but silence can also be study, observation, planning. The old version of me, the gentle, accommodating woman, had faded the night my son took away my dignity over dinner. The new version was learning how to breathe again. As I tucked the deed into an envelope and hid it inside my drawer, I felt a strange calm settle over me. "They think I'm fragile," I murmured to the empty room. "Maybe it's time to show them how wrong they are." Downstairs, Lily's piano practice began again, faint and uncertain, like courage in the making. For a few days after finding that old deed, I walked around as if carrying a secret flame, small but alive, warming parts of me that had grown cold. I still smiled when Karen passed me in the hallway. I still asked Michael how work was going, but behind my calm voice, I was cataloging everything, dates, numbers, receipts, like I'd done for 40 years as an accountant. Old habits die hard, and old women like me learn that survival often hides beneath courtesy. On Wednesday morning, when Michael and Karen left for work, I placed my worn leather purse on the table. Inside were the property papers, my checkbook, and a folded card with the name of a lawyer a friend from church had quietly recommended, Daniel Price, Elder Law and Family Matters. The church widow circle calls him the bulldog with manners. I practiced my explanation out loud, rehearsing every word until my reflection in the toaster looked almost confident. At 10:30, I caught the city bus downtown. My hands trembled when I pressed the buzzer to get off, but fear and resolve feel a lot alike once you start moving forward. Mr. Price's office smelled faintly of coffee and copy paper. He greeted me with genuine warmth, a novelty these days. "Mrs. Hall," he said, offering a steady handshake. "How can I help you today?" I told him everything, selling my house after Richard's death, giving the money to my son for this so-called shared home, the humiliation at dinner, the way I was being moved to the basement like a forgotten chair. I showed him my documents, the old deed with my husband's neat handwriting. He examined them closely, adjusting his glasses. "Margaret, this line here, see it? You were the original purchaser. When the title transferred again to add your son, there's no clause revoking your portion. Legally, you still possess a controlling share." I blinked at him. "You mean, they can't force me out?" He smiled faintly. "They can't legally remove you, no. But if things have become toxic, we can do better than just defending your space. We can leverage it, force a property settlement negotiation or a buyout. You'd have the means to live as you choose." The words "live as you choose" sent a shiver through me. For years, I'd lived as expected. The idea of owning my life again felt reckless, intoxicating. I asked quietly, "Would this hurt Michael?" Price folded his hands. "It may hurt his pride, Mrs. Hall, but not his future. Sometimes teaching respect costs both parties something, but it preserves dignity." When I left his office, the late autumn air felt sharper, cleaner. The world looked less gray. Crossing Main Street, I stopped for coffee at a small diner, the kind Richard once loved. The waitress refilled my cup twice, and I caught myself smiling at my reflection in the glass window, an old woman with purpose. That evening, I returned home before anyone else. I folded laundry, set the table neatly for 3, and slipped an envelope addressed Daniel Price. Eggs into my drawer for safekeeping, my signed authorization for him to proceed. Later, when Michael came in juggling his briefcase, he barely noticed me. "Mom, we'll need you to move your dresser this weekend." "The painters are coming," I nodded pleasantly. "Of course, dear." But inside, I was ticking hours like a clockmaker counting down to midnight. 2 days later, Mr. Price called. "The paperwork is ready. Once I file, they'll receive formal notification within the week." "Are you certain, Margaret?" I looked out the window at the backyard where Lily was chasing the family dog across fallen leaves. "Yes," I said softly. "For once in my life, I am." That night after dinner, as laughter echoed from the living room and my son's voice filled the house I'd paid for, I folded my tea towel, turned off the lamp, and whispered, "They think I've surrendered, but they have no idea what's coming." The letter arrived on a Monday morning, sealed in a tidy white envelope from Price and Associates. I almost pitied Michael and Karen when I heard the mail slot click. Almost. From my window, I could see Karen bend down to pick it up. She frowned at the return address but slid her nail neatly under the flap. A few seconds later, her face drained of color. "Michael," she called, "you'd better read this." They stood together in the foyer, whispering, eyes flickering between the papers in his hands. I could almost hear the hum of panic rising beneath their murmured voices. That was the official notice of claim for partition and buyout, meaning if they wanted to keep my half of the house I'd bought, they'd have to buy me out at full market value. If they couldn't, the house would be listed for sale under court supervision. By noon, their bedroom door slammed hard enough to rattle my teacup. "Mom!" Michael's voice boomed up the hallway. "Could you come here a minute?" Every instinct told me to stay seated, but I set my cup down carefully and walked to the kitchen, my cane tapping steady as a heartbeat. He had the notice in his hand, his other curled into a fist. "What the hell is this? What are you doing?" "I'm exercising my rights," I said, calm as Sunday morning. "Mr. Price explained everything to you in writing." Karen's voice wavered. "You hired a lawyer against us?" "We're family," I tilted my head. "Family doesn't plan to move me into the basement and call it generosity." Michael's eyes blazed. "You want money, is that it? After everything we've done? Money?" I laughed softly. "I want respect, Michael. Unfortunately, lawyers measure that in dollars." He threw the letter onto the counter, pacing. "This is insane. You'd destroy your own home, our home, over your pride?" I met his gaze, steady and unflinching. "You already destroyed my home when you took away my place in it." For a long moment, no one spoke. Even the refrigerator seemed to hold its breath. Then young Lily appeared in the doorway, eyes wide. "Dad, why are you yelling at Grandma again?" Karen rushed forward, flustered. "Sweetheart, go upstairs. Now." "No." The child's chin trembled, but her voice stayed firm. "You're always mad at her. She helps me with my music. She said she used to teach Dad songs when he was little." Michael froze, guilt flickering across his features like lightning behind glass. "Lily," I said gently, "why don't you practice for your recital?" "I'd love to hear you later." She nodded and slipped away. As her small footsteps faded upstairs, silence settled like snow. Michael finally sank into a chair, hands rubbing his temples. "Mom, why didn't you just talk to me?" I breathed out slowly. "I did, Michael. For months. You stopped hearing me the day you decided my gratitude mattered more than my voice." He looked smaller somehow. His anger deflated, guilt crowding its place. Karen stood stiff, arms folded like armor, but her eyes darted nervously. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now," I said, "you can either buy my share or sell the house. Either way, I'll have enough to live as I choose, and I will." Michael's throat worked as he swallowed. "This could ruin us." Then it's time you learn what ruin feels like. My voice shook, not from fear but from release. I endured it quietly for years. At that, I turned and went back to my room. Through the door, I could hear them arguing in muffled tones, maybe plotting, maybe regretting. I didn't care. The next morning, a knock came at my door, not Karen's sharp tap, but a hesitant one. Lily stepped inside, clutching a small drawing. "Grandma, I drew your garden from your old house. I think you should have it." Tears pricked my eyes. I pulled her close, breathing in the scent of crayons and innocence. "Thank you, sweetheart. Are you leaving us?" she whispered. "For a little while," I said softly. "But Grandma's always just a phone call away." When she left, I stared at the child's drawing, the lilac bush, the porch swing, sunlight on everything. It looked more like hope than memory. Later that afternoon, Mr. Price called. "Mrs. Hall, they've agreed to settle. You'll get fair value for your share within 30 days. Fair value." 2 words that covered so much more than money. When I hung up, I poured myself a glass of sweet tea. The taste wasn't bitterness, it was closure. Down the hall, the voices had quieted. Karen retreated to her room, and Michael's footsteps eventually led to the door. The house, their house, felt emptier already. I looked around one last time at the walls I had paid for, the roof I had kept over all our heads, and said quietly to the empty air, "Lesson learned, son. Love deserves space, not pity. And you never should have mistaken my silence for surrender." 3 weeks later, the moving truck idled in front of the house. Its steady rumble felt like punctuation, the final period at the end of a long, messy chapter. Michael stood in the driveway, hands shoved in his pockets, the autumn wind pushing back his hair. Karen lingered behind him, arms crossed. There was no shouting this time. No resentment left to throw, only silence and awkward kindness hiding what pride couldn't say aloud. I stepped outside with my last box, photo albums, Richard's watch, Lily's drawing of our old garden taped on top. "Mom," Michael said hesitantly, "You sure about this apartment? You don't have to rush," I smiled faintly. "I'm sure. The lease is signed. I even get a balcony with morning light." He nodded, eyes downcast. "I still can't believe we ended up in court over this." "Neither can I confessed. But sometimes it takes losing something to understand its cost." Karen bit her lip, then offered, "If you ever need help, with groceries or anything." "Thank you, Karen." I held her gaze. "I'll manage." Lily darted forward from behind her mother, arms tight around me. "I'll visit Grandma. Every weekend if Mom lets me." I hugged her close, breathing in that mix of bubblegum shampoo and innocence that forgives everything. "You're welcome anytime, sweetheart. And don't let anyone tell you kindness is weakness." She smiled, wise beyond her years. "I won't." The driver loaded my last box. I turned once more toward the house, 3 stories tall, freshly painted, immaculate. It looked nothing like the home I imagined decades ago with Richard. But maybe that was all right. Homes aren't wooden walls. They're peace of mind. And mine was finally coming back to me. The new apartment sat near the edge of town, in a quiet senior complex by a small lake. It smelled faintly of lilacs when I moved in, as if fate had remembered my favorite flower. I unpacked slowly over the week, placing photos carefully on the shelves, letting each one find its place, the way I was learning to find mine again. On the first Sunday evening, I sat on the balcony with tea. A golden sunset rested over the water. For the first time in years, the silence surrounding me wasn't heavy. It was tender, deliberate, earned. Lily video called that night. Her face filled the screen, eyes bright. "Grandma, Dad says you taught him a lesson." I chuckled softly. "Oh, and what does he think that lesson was?" "He said you reminded him that love doesn't mean control." I smiled, warmth pressing behind my eyes. "I suppose that's a start." After we said goodnight, I looked around at my quiet little apartment, mine, entirely mine. Bills with my name, keys in my purse, the power to close my door and still feel free. I reached for my notebook, the same one I used to keep track of household budgets, and wrote a single line across a blank page. Freedom isn't revenge, it's remembrance, because that's what dignity really is. Remembering who you were before someone made you forget. I still visit the church every Wednesday. Some women there call me brave, but I don't feel brave. I just feel whole again. Michael phones occasionally, his voice clipped with guilt, and though part of me aches, I answer. His remorse is his journey now, not my burden. As for me, I fill my days with simple rituals, watering potted plants, reading novels aloud for the neighbor down the hall, writing letters to Lily about patience and kindness. One afternoon, while humming an old tune Richard used to play on the porch, I realized the ache in my chest had softened into something lighter, acceptance. I whispered to the empty room that still smelled faintly of tea and sun-bleached curtains. I lost a son that day, but I found my peace, and maybe in time he'll find his too. I closed my eyes, hearing only the slow turn of wind through the trees outside, and let the silence finally feel like home. Thank you for listening to today's story from Granny Story Corner. Life teaches us lessons in the most unexpected ways, doesn't it? If this story touched your heart, please subscribe for more real-life tales that remind us of our shared humanity. Until next time, may your own story be filled with wisdom and love.